Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into something that affects literally all of us. We're looking at that massive, profound gap between the idealized American dream, that promise where hard work guarantees security, and the actual, on-the-ground economic realities facing the modern working class. We're going to pull directly from real, grounded accounts of everyday people trying to navigate housing, wages, and debt to map out exactly how the modern economy functions for folks living right on the edge. So let's kick things off with a number that, frankly, should make all of us stop in our tracks. 17 hours. That's the length of a single workday for Hilton. He's just 19 years old. And get this, after suffering an absolutely unimaginable personal tragedy, losing unborn twins with his girlfriend, Hilton didn't even have the luxury of time to grieve. He took off exactly 3 days. Why? Well, right as his family was supposed to grow, they moved into a new place and their rent completely tripled. Just to keep a roof over his head, this teenager is working 17-hour days across 2 jobs starting at 7 a.m. sharp. It's a pretty stark baseline for the sheer volume of labor required these days just to survive. All right, moving into Section 1, the hustle for living wage, fighting for every dollar. Here, we're really looking at the daily grind of low-wage work and just how quickly it can pull you right back in. Take Amelia, for example. She's got a 23-year history of successful addiction recovery. She actually spent 8 years working in the construction trades. And yet, she finds herself right back where she started, waitressing. She talks about this daily humiliation of serving Mickey Mouse pancakes while dealing with difficult customers, feeling utterly, completely trapped. And this perfectly illustrates the emotional toll of that low-wage cycle. Amelia totally owns her past choices. She acknowledges how her early struggles with substance abuse, which stemmed from a really tough immigration experience, kind of derailed her college opportunities. But her current reality? It's a heavy, everyday consequence that feels almost impossible to escape. But you might be wondering, what happens when you actually do get a break? Let's look at DJ's story. DJ was working at Walgreens, just desperately putting in applications every single day, trying to find a way out. And finally, he lands a full-time job as a union organizer for the Fight for $15 movement. In one single move, his income essentially doubled, jumping up to $42,000 a year. It's exactly the kind of leap that's supposed to change everything, right? It's that milestone we're all told we need to aim for. Well, here is the incredibly frustrating reality. Despite doubling his salary, DJ and his wife Takita are still living paycheck to paycheck. Sure, yes, they can occasionally afford to go to the movies now or buy a toy for their kids, and obviously that is a massive emotional relief. But think about what that means for your own savings when the baseline cost of survival becomes so insanely high that $42,000 a year for a family still leaves them riding the absolute edge of their checking account. It really shows how the goalposts for financial comfort have just fundamentally moved. Which brings us to Section 2, the math of homeownership, closing costs and reality checks. So if a better salary doesn't guarantee security, surely buying a piece of property does, right? Let's take a look at newlyweds Jose and Elizabeth. To really understand their sheer desperation to buy a house, you have to understand their current living situation. They live with their parents, and all 3 of them, Jose, Elizabeth, and their young son Aiden, share one single bedroom. The lack of space is so severe that when Aiden gets angry or overwhelmed, his designated safe spot is literally crying underneath the bed. He has absolutely nowhere else to go. So as you can see, this isn't just about building equity. This is an urgent psychological need for just a little bit of breathing room. So great news, they actually find a house. But the math they have to confront at the closing table, it is staggering. Jose negotiated the base price down to $313,700 using a VA loan, which is awesome. But then comes the harsh reality check of closing costs. While sitting right there at the signing table, Jose is completely shell-shocked to discover that their final loan amount isn't $313,700. With closing costs rolled in, it balloons to $323,884. It's this confusing, super opaque process where thousands of dollars are just suddenly stacked onto your debt right at the finish line. And the paperwork itself is just a massive hurdle. The title agent hands them the truth in lending document and actually calls it the scary one because it shows exactly how much they're going to pay over the entire 30-year life of the loan. Jose's guys are completely glazed over. While everyone else in the room is cracking jokes and celebrating the new home, he is intensely serious. He's sitting there doing the math in his head, realizing he's going to be 57 years old before he is finally free of this single signature. It's a huge, high-stakes commitment. Let's move on to Section 3, trapped by high interest, when the principal won't budge. Because homeownership clearly doesn't always equal wealth building, we really need to look at the cautionary tale of Percy and Beverly. They bought their home for just $79,000 way back when they had steady, better-paying jobs. And they have been paying their mortgage diligently for 13 years. I mean, really think about that time frame. That is well over a decade of monthly payments. But here is the jaw-dropping systemic reality. When they check their loan balance after 13 years of those payments, they realize that the amount that has actually gone toward paying down the principal of the home is absolutely $0. Nothing. I know. How does that even happen? Well, this systemic debt trap was triggered super early on. Literally just 2 months after they bought the house, their loan was sold to another company. Payments got crossed, lawsuits were threatened, and eventually they were locked into a punishing 9% interest rate. With a monthly payment of roughly $1,118, the interest entirely consumed every single payment. It's the exact kind of bureaucratic nightmare that could happen to any of us, and this heavy financial burden ultimately pushed them to file for Chapter 13 bankruptcy, just to keep the home from immediate foreclosure. This right here is the textbook definition of being house poor. It's when you spend so much of your income just keeping the roof over your head that you can't afford basic life expenses. See, Percy lost his $45,000 a year job when his agency closed down. Now he works nights cleaning a shopping mall for just $8 to $10 an hour. He is totally trapped in a house he can barely afford to keep, but absolutely cannot afford to lose, because his family still relies on it as their only safety net. The emotional context of this whole situation is incredibly heavy. Percy spends his days at a community center hanging out with retired friends who used to work manufacturing jobs. As one of his friends bluntly puts it, they feel entirely abandoned. They worked their whole lives, built a system, and now feel totally swept under the rug, losing their homes and just scraping by. Now, regardless of your politics, the source material paints a very clear, objective picture here. These workers feel the capitalist structure they actively participated in has fundamentally failed them in their later years. All right, let's look at our final theme, Section 4, the hidden costs of survival, the unbanked and overworked. We really need to look beyond just bank balances at the sort of invisible penalties of living on the edge. Let's jump back to DJ and Takita for a second. Even with DJ's new, higher-paying union job, they are what economists call unbanked. Basically, that means they don't have traditional bank accounts or credit cards. To pay something like their light bill, they have to physically walk into a currency exchange and pay in cash. Because they are operating entirely outside the traditional banking system, they are completely missing out on building a credit history, which, as DJ himself acknowledges, kind of makes the world go round. It's this invisible systemic friction that makes upward mobility just that much harder. And this systemic friction translates directly into a heavy psychological toll. You really cannot separate the two. When you have a 19-year-old like Hilton working 17 hours a day, the sheer physical exhaustion dictates his entire life. For D-Day, the stress of the hustle compounds deep-seated personal issues. He grapples with severe anger issues stemming from an estranged father who basically equated money with fatherhood. The pressure cooker of financial instability just amplifies these personal, emotional struggles, leaving folks with very little bandwidth to actually heal. We also see this in how society values, or, undervalues lived experience. Remember Amelia, the waitress with 23 years of sobriety. She gets contacted by a youth organization to speak to 180 kids about drug and alcohol prevention. I mean, it's a deeply personal, life-altering topic. When they offer her payment, she expects absolutely nothing. They offer her $500. She is completely shocked, telling them she'd literally do it for free. But meanwhile, the organizer mentions that other speakers demand $4,000 plus travel expenses. That huge gap between a grateful $500 and a demanded $4,000 highlights a really heartbreaking reality. Systemic undervaluation conditions people on the economic edge to assume their hard-earned life experience is worth almost nothing. We've covered a lot of ground today, looking at the raw numbers and the very real human impact behind them. From 17-hour workdays and 9% interest debt traps to the heavy psychological weight of being unbanked and house poor. So I want to leave you with a provocative question to chew on. When the baseline cost of survival continues to completely outpace wages, and the systems designed to build wealth instead seem to generate endless debt, is the American dream a milestone we can actually reach, or is it just a mirage keeping us walking through the desert? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and definitely keep questioning the systems around you.